Begin today the Gemara on Daf Chafei with Beis, 6 lines up from the bottom of the Yomud, where it says Amar Rabba. So we had here a Mishnah, a machlokes between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel, whether you say Neder shehuta miktsasai huta kulai. The case of the Mishnah was when a person saw people eating from his tree, and he said they should all be asked to eat, makes a neder to asa them like a carbon. Then he discovers that one of them was his father or a brother. So then the neder, he says that no, I didn't mean my father. So Beis Shammai says that his father will be mutter, but the rest will be aser. Beis Hillel says everybody becomes mutter because the rule is neder shehuta miktsasai huta kulai. They all become mutter. Okay, then the Gemara brought that there's a Mishnah later in the Masechta where the same machlokes between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel is between the Rabbanon and Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva says in a case where part of a neder, there was a heter for the neder, so the whole neder falls apart, huta kulai, and the Rabbanon said only regarding this that they found a Pesach for the neder doesn't take effect, but the rest of the neder remains, like the opinion of Beis Shammai. So here the Gemara is going to bring a machlokes between Rabba and Rava, exactly in which case are Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel and the Rabbanon and Rabbi Akiva arguing whether you say that once part of the neder is hutar, the rest of the neder is hutar as well. Amar Rabba, we're starting from Chafei with Beis, 6 lines from the bottom of the Yomud. So Rabba said, the Kula Alma, everybody will agree. If this person, when he discovers his mistake, so he comes and says, I saw people that are picking figs from his tree. If I would have known that my father is amongst you, what would have he said then? So that my neder would have been, Kolchem asurim, all of you should be aser. In other words, using the same language that he originally said, but I would have added chutz mi abba, besides my father. So in such a case, everybody would agree, even Beis Hillel would agree, the kulai nasurin, that even after this, the neder is not going to be totally permitted. All of them will still be aser. And va'aviv mutter. Now he realized his mistake that it was his father. Only his father will be mutter. In this case, because he's saying that even after I realize it's my father, so yeah, I did make a mistake in part of my neder, but he's saying clearly, but I wouldn't have changed the whole lashon of the neder that I originally said. The lashon that I originally said, which is that you all should be aser, he would have kept that lashon. He just would have added chutz miyabeh. So therefore, everybody would agree in such a case that since you're basically keeping the same language you would have said before, that the father take is a mistake, so that he will be mutter, but everybody else will be aser. Where is the chiddush of Beis Hillel that I say once part of the neder is mutter, the rest is mutter, and here's the machlokes between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel. Ela ba'omer, if a person now says, Ilu ayisi yedei shabe b'nechem, had I known that my father is amongst you in picking the figs from this tree, ayisi omer, then my whole neder would have been completely different. I would have said, Ploini u'ploini asurim va'abba mutter. So I wouldn't have said, you're all aser besides my father. Then I would have made a different neder. Then I would have singled out and I would have said, you and you are aser, and my father is allowed. So now, in such a case, what he's saying is, now that he noticed that it's his father, he would have really said a completely different lashon of his neder. So then, not only did he realize that there's a mistake in his neder, but he's also now pointing out that he really would have said a completely different lashon of his neder. So therefore, here, dafka in this case is where Beis Hillel holds that once part of it is mutter, the whole thing is mutter, because not only was there a mistake, but also the lashon itself, he would have said a completely different lashon. And Beis Shammai still holds that I say, neder shutim miktsasai, lo yotakulai, and the father will be mutter, and the rest of the people will be aser. Just the Ram points out, interesting, why taka would this person say now, plaini aser, and my father is mutter? Why wouldn't he keep the original lashon? Because when a person sees that it's his father, he doesn't want to use a lashon. Perhaps he doesn't want to use a lashon of kulchem asurim, which sounds, at least for a moment, like he's including his father, that he's not allowing his father to have hana. And then afterwards, it's chutz miyabeh. Why should he say it in such a way that it should look like that he's including his father, and then say chutz? For the honor of his father, he would have originally made it very clear, Plaini and Plaini are aser, and not my father. So therefore, he would have said the whole neder differently for the honor of his father. So therefore, the whole neder he said in the beginning is completely a mistake. And that was the chiddush of Beis Hillel, but this is the case where Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai argued. Rava says the exact opposite. The kula alma, everybody would agree, kol heichid amar, If a person comes and says, if I would have known that my father is amongst the people that are picking the figs here, so then I would have changed the whole language of my neder. I would have said, that it's only you and you that are aser, and my father is allowed. So in such a case I say, Kulam mutarim, that everybody agrees, even Beis Shammai would agree that because he would have changed the whole language of his neder, the whole neder falls apart. The whole thing is a mistake. When's the machlokes between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel? If the person now, when he discovers that his father was there, he says, had I known my father was amongst them, I would have said the same lashon that I said in the beginning, that you're all aser, but I would have added chutz me'aba, besides my father. So this case where he's saying, I would have not changed the original language of my neder. I just would have added another point, chutz me'aba. So what happens now? Do I say that only the father becomes mutter? That's what Beis Shammai says. Or Beis Hillel says, because he would have been matter the father, so now the whole thing falls apart. Now what's this machlokes based on? So the Gemara says it's based on a different machlokes. How do we look at the language of a person when a person speaks? And there's two parts of his sentence. The first part and the second part. Shammai, Savri Lo Rab Meir. Shammai's opinion is that we follow what Rab Meir said. What did Rab Meir say? When a person says two things in one sentence, and there's sort of a contradiction. He says, the source of the machlokes is actually regarding the halacha of tumura. A person has an animal, and he says, this animal should be a tumura for an oila, should become a carbon oila. Or then afterwards he says, no, it should be a tumura for a shlamim. So in the same, he says something first, and then he changes and says something else afterwards. So which of what he said is more significant? Do I say that what he said in the beginning is what he meant, and what he said afterwards is insignificant? Or do I say, no, what he said in the beginning, he was still making up his mind, he was still thinking, and then what he said last is what he really meant? So Beis Shammai's opinion in that case is, Tfais Lashon Rishon. You have to take what the person said in the beginning. And therefore what the Gemara is saying is, we apply the same thing over here regarding this neder. Because in the beginning, when he made his neder, which lashon did he use? He said, Kolchem asurim. Now, when he figures out that his father was there, the person says, I would have kept the same lashon of Kolchem asurim, but I would have added chutz me'aba. But because the original lashon that he began with, which is Kolchem asurim, is the beginning of the statement, is the beginning of the sentence, and that's the ikr of his neder, and that he's saying he would have not changed. So therefore, since the ikr of the neder is not being changed, so therefore Beis Shammai says that ikr of the neder remains. Only the chutz me'aba, the father is going to be mutter, that was a mistake, but the ikr of the neder stays. And Beis Hillel sabri lo Rabbi Yosi. However, Beis Hillel holds like Rabbi Yosi, the Amar Rabbi Yosi said, begemar dvarav adam nitfas. A person you take, that is, from what he's saying, from the end of his sentence. When a person says something, so probably what he said first he didn't really mean. If he says something afterwards which is different, that's what he really meant. And therefore, over here, if in the beginning he said kolchem asurim, and now he says that I would have said different. I would have said kolchem asurim, but I would have added chutz me'aba. Chutz me'aba is actually the main point of the neder. So the fact that it's being mata chutz me'aba, so therefore the first part of the neder is insignificant, and therefore the whole neder falls apart, and therefore Beis Hillel that it says that the neder shotem miktsasai chota kolai. That's the machlokes here between Rabbah and Rava. So again, the point over here is that according to Rabbah, the whole machlokes of Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel is dafke in a case where he's changing. He's saying, now that he finds out his father was there, he's saying that I would change the whole entire lashon of the neder. And Rabbah says, no, punkt fakert. In the case where the person would have changed the entire lashon of the neder, everybody would agree that the whole neder falls apart. The machlokes is dafke in a case where he says, after he finds out his father was there, I wouldn't have changed the whole lashon of the neder. I would have used the same lashon, I just would have added chutz me'aba. And the question is whether you look at the beginning of what he said, and therefore the neder still remains intact, or you look at the end of what he says. So now the Gemara brings from a Mishnah, which is actually a continuation of the Mishnah that the Gemara quoted before. The Gemara before, as I mentioned, quoted the machlokes between Rabbi Akiva and the Rabbanan regarding this subject, whether when part of the neder is mutter, does the rest of the neder fall apart? Rabbi Akiva says yes, like Beis Hillel, and the Rabbanan say no. And there, in that Mishnah, the Mishnah continues and spells out the case. So it says later in the Mishnah there, what is the case that Rabbi Akiva said, a neder that part of it is now allowed, huta kulai. So the whole neder falls off, the whole neder is allowed. So there's three different cases that are mentioned here. So he starts off saying this: Kainam she'eni nana lekolchem. A person made a neder, I'm not going to have ana of any of you. And then he realizes that amongst them, there's somebody that he wants to have ana from. Maybe he realizes one of them is his father, or whatever reason, or he maybe found a Pesach for one of them. So hutta echad man. So now, if there's a heta for one of them, hutru kulam. So the whole neder falls apart for all of them. That's the first case. So this is where Rabbi Akiva said that neder shutam miktsasi hutta kulai, and the Rabbana disagreed with him. Now, if the person came and said in the beginning that she'eni nene loy lezeh or lezeh, I'm not going to have a no, not from you and not from you. So he didn't just say kulchem, but he said a different lashon. He specified not you, not you. And then what happened? He changed his mind and he realized that one person, not changed his mind, one person he realized is a mistake, or he found a Pesach for one person. So now the halacha of the Mishnah says is as follows: Hutar Rishain. If the one that the heta was for is the first person that he said that he's going to be asked to hutru kulam, so then they all become mutter. The whole neder falls apart. Huta ha'achrain, if it's the last person that there's a heta for the neder, so then ha'achrain mutter, only that last person the neder will be mutter, but the kulan asurin. The rest of them will be aser. Okay, so we have over here three different cases of this Mishnah. The first case of kulchem, and then the second case where hutta harishain, and the third case where hutta ha'achrain. Now the question is, how do we understand the pshat in this Mishnah? What is the difference between hutta harishain or hutta ha'achrain? How are we going to explain, why should there be any difference? If you find one of them was a mistake, or there was a Pesach, and therefore there's a heta for one, why should there be any difference if it's the first or it's the last? So the Gemara says as follows: Now, according to Rabbe, what did Rabbe say before? That the only time when there's the machlokes between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel, and the same thing between Rabbi Akiva and the Rabbanon, is if the person says when he discovers that he made a mistake in his neder, that I would have said a different lashon. He's changing the whole lashon that he would have said in the beginning. That's where there's a machlokes. So now, according to Rabbe, we can explain moikim la lereisha. We could explain the reisha of this Mishnah. Now, when it says here the reisha in this Mishnah, it refers to the two first cases where it says that when the person changes his mind, or not changes his mind, but when he's being matir his neder, that the whole neder falls apart. So in those two cases where the whole neder falls apart, what's the reason? Because the Omar lezeh ulezeh. In the beginning, he said that I'm making a neder on kulchem. Now, when he discovers that there's someone that was a mistake, he's changing his lashon. Now he's saying lezeh lezeh, and therefore Rabbi Akiva holds the neder falls apart in such a case, and it's this case that the Rabbanan disagree. That was Rabbi's pshat. That in this case is the machlokes. Now the Sefer, the last case of this Mishnah, where it says that if the achrain was hutar, then the whole neder does not fall apart. What is that talking about? Even there, Rabbi Akiva would agree that we don't say the whole thing is mutter. The Amar lekulchem. The case is that in the beginning he said that I'm making a neder for kolchem. In the end he said he's making a neder for kolchem chutz from this person. So because he's not changing the lashon of his neder, according to Rabbe, if you're not changing the whole lashon of the neder you would have made in the beginning, the neder remains. Besides for that person, the whole neder remains. So we can understand this Mishnah. Much a second, just before I go weiter, the Ram points out that there are, like I mentioned, there are three cases here in this Mishnah. So in the first two cases, there's a chiddush that it's saying. It really, the first two cases are saying the same point, that if you discover there's a mistake in your neder, and then you say, I would have used a different lashon than I used before. That's the reason why Rabbi Akiva says the whole neder falls apart. It's not just enough that you discovered a mistake, you also have to say that I would have said a completely different lashon. But the Ram points out the first two cases of this Mishnah are not exactly the same. The first case is saying that the lashon that he began with is kulchem. Then when he discovers that amongst them is someone that he doesn't want the neder to be for him, so he would have changed the lashon and he would have said lezeh, lezeh. So that he's changing from kulchem to lezeh. And then in the second case of the Mishnah, it says the opposite. When he made the neder, the lashon he used originally was lezeh, lezeh. He pointed out the individuals that are going to be aser. And then when he discovers that someone is not part of the neder that he wanted, should not be part of the neder, he would have switched to kolchem. He would have said, all of you besides him. Okay, so in each case there's a chiddush, because when a person changes his lashon from the original lashon to something else, so because he's changing his whole lashon that he said in the beginning, that's the reason why we say the whole neder falls apart, because you realize they made a mistake in the whole lashon of the neder. But still, the Mishnah has to point out whether the mistake was that first you said kulchem and then you said lezeh lezeh, the neder falls apart, or if in the beginning you said zeh and then you change and you say that you would have said kulchem. Either way, the neder falls apart. And the Ran says, similar to what I mentioned before, if the case over here, for example, would be when a person discovers that his father is amongst them, so for some people, it's more kovedik if they're making a neder and their father's amongst those people, so they don't want that the father should think for even a second that you're including your father in this neder. So for some people, how do they do that? They're going to say, leilazeh, and you're not going to mention your father. So then it's going to be clear that your father's not included. Whereas if you say kulchem sounds like you're including your father, at least for a second. It sounds like you're including your father. And then you're saying chutz me'abba, so that's not so kovedik. But for other people, the Ran says it could actually be the opposite. If you have a few people standing in front of you and you say, you're usher and you're usher, it almost looks like you're about to say that your father's usher. Right, so therefore you don't want to look like you're counting a bunch of people and your father's like coming next, he's also going to be usher. So therefore you want to say kulchem chutz me'abba. That's for some people that's more honorable. So either way, if the person changes the lashon of his neder, so the Tana here is saying that Rabbi Akiva holds the whole neder falls apart, and that's the case that the Rabbanan argued. So the Mishnah is understood. But now, according to Rav's Pshat, what did Rav say? That in a case where you change the lashon, everybody agrees that the whole neder falls apart. So the machlokes over here has to be where the person discovers his mistake, but he's keeping the same lashon. He says, I would have said the same that I said before, but I just would have added chutz me'abba. So according to you, so bishloi mereisha, in the first case of this Mishnah here, maikim la da'ama la kulchem. So the case over here is that he said in the beginning kulchem, and then when he discovers his mistake, he's not changing his lashon. He's not saying I would have said anything else. He would have said kulchem as well. He just would have said except my father, except the person that is not part of the neder. Okay, so therefore that is the case where there's the machlokes between the Rabbanon and Rabbi Akiva. But the next case, the Omar lezeh lezeh, what was the next case of the Mishnah? The next case of the Mishnah is, in the beginning this person said lezeh lezeh. And what is he saying now? Now he's also saying lezeh lezeh. So what the Gemara over here actually means to say is that the Sefer is that in the beginning he said kulchem, and then afterwards he's switching and he's saying, now my lashon would have been different, lezeh or lezeh. So to explain this Gemara, at least according to the Ran's Pshat, there's a few ways how to learn this Gemara. The Gemara here is not so clear. So the Ran says what the Gemara is saying over here is, according to Rava, that the machlokes between the Rabbanon and Rabbi Akiva, whether I say neder shehuta miktsase huta kulay, that the whole neder falls apart, is in a case where the person discovers his mistake, but he's not going to change the lashon of his neder. So there's no chiddush in two cases to say, there's no reason for the Mishnah to say, if in the beginning he said kulchem, and then he discovers his mistake, and he would again say kulchem, so then that's the way the machlokes between Rabbi Akiva and the Rabbanan is, if the neder falls apart. If in the beginning he said loy lezeh, and then afterwards again he didn't switch his lashon and he said again loy lezeh, that's where the machlokes of Rabbi Akiva and Rabbanan is. There's no chiddush in this. The point is the same point, that if the person does not change the lashon of his neder, then the neder doesn't fall apart. So therefore, in the second case of this Mishnah, we can't say that he didn't change the lashon of his neder, because then there would be no chiddush here. So eloseife the Omar lezeh or lezeh. What's the second case of this Mishnah speaking about? That's what seife here means. The second case, that in the beginning he said a lashon of kulchem. Now when he realizes his mistake, he's changing the whole lashon of the neder. He's saying, I would have said a different lashon. If so, Rabbi Akiva, this is Rabbi Akiva speaking here. My pligi Rabbanan aleh. Why do the Rabbanan argue on him? According to Rava, in a case where the person not only discovered his mistake, but he also would have changed the whole lashon of his neder, so then the Rabbanan don't even argue on this. So why would the Rabbanan argue on this case? So this is the question. V'ha'amrit, Rava said, Divrei HaKoil mutter, that in such a case where he's changing the lashon of his neder, everybody would agree that it's mutter. Now, besides the question that the Gemara is asking on the second case of this Mishnah, which the Gemara here calls the Sefer, the Ram points out that there's obviously also a question from the last case of the Mishnah. In the last case of the Mishnah, it says that Rabbi Akiva would agree that you don't say Huta Miktsase Huta Kulai. when the achrain was found to be the one that he doesn't want should be part of the neder, you don't say huta miktsase huta kulay. The Gemara could have asked on Rave, you always say, according to Rabbi Akiva, huta miktsase huta kulay. As soon as the person discovers a mistake, the whole neder is mutter. It doesn't matter if he has to change the lashon or he's not going to change the lashon. It doesn't make a difference. So what would be the pshat in the last case of this Mishnah, that there's a case that Rabbi Akiva agrees that I don't say huta miktsase huta kulay? Okay, the Gemara doesn't bother going to the last case. The Gemara doesn't ask it beferish, but that's an obvious question on Rava as well. So the Gemara now explains and says, we got the pshat in this whole Mishnah wrong, at least in the second two cases. The Mishnah means something completely different. Amalei Rava, so Rava answers and says, and according to Rabbe, so do we have a good pshat in the Mishnah for what Rabbi Akiva is saying in the Sefer of this Mishnah? What is Rabbi explaining? What is this Mishnah saying over here? The Omar L'kulchem, that in the beginning this person said kulchem, and then he changed the lashon of his neder, and when he finds his mistake, so because he changed the lashon of his neder, that's why there's a machlokes between Rabbi Akiva and the Rabbanon, right? And then when it comes to the last case of the Mishnah, when it says in the last case of the Mishnah that even Rabbi Akiva would agree that we don't say neder huta miktsase huta kulay, the reason is because he said in the beginning kulchem, and when he discovered his mistake, he says, I would have used the same lashon of kulchem, and therefore the neder remains. But if so, what the Mishnah speaks about doesn't make sense. Hai dein hu rishon v'hai dein hu achrein. So then why does it say in the Mishnah, what is the distinction the Mishnah is making? If the first person was discovered is a mistake in your neder, or the last person is a mistake? Why does that matter first to last? The pshat that the Gemara is saying according to Rabbi is, what does it depend on? Whether when you discover your mistake, are you going to change your lashon or not change your lashon? It has nothing to do with the first person was the mistake or the last person. So there has to be a different pshat here in this Mishnah. Hello, therefore the Gemara says that really the pshat is completely different. In the beginning of the Mishnah, what it's speaking about is that he when he said his neder the first time, he used the language of kulchem, and then when he found his mistake, so according to Rabbe, he would have switched his lashon. According to Rabbe, maybe he wouldn't have switched his lashon. That's the reisha. The reisha is talking about the case that we were talking about in our sugya, when a person discovers a mistake, and then you have to figure out whether you're going to be mevatel the whole neder or not. But the sefer of that Mishnah is a completely different thing. The person makes a neder, and he's asking a few people to have a no from them, and he makes the neder in such a way that the second becomes sort of dependent on the first, and the third dependent on the second. Why? Because V'amar, what he said is that Pliny Kapliny. So the person first says, Reuven should be asa to me, and then he says, Shimon should be asa to me like Reuven. And then a Pliny Kapliny, and then he says, Levi, the third person, should be asa to me like Shimon. So he's the second, the third, each one, the later one, is dependent on the earlier one. So therefore, what's the Mishnah saying? The pshat in the Mishnah is simple. This has nothing to do with the machlokes of Rabba and Rava. If the first person is discovered to be a mistake, so since the second, third is dependent on the first, so it's all batel. But if it's the last person which was discovered to be a mistake, so only he's batel, but the previous one will still be an neder. Dekenami, I'll prove to you that this is the correct pshat on this Mishnah, because the Tanya, we learned in the Braise, or the Tanan, in the Mishnah, Hutar ha-emtzoi, what if the middle one was discovered to be a mistake? So the Mishnah says, Hey menu lamata, to the people that come from after him later, mutaran, they'll all be mutar. But lamaila, the people that he asked on himself, that were before him, asur, and they'll remain asur. So you see clearly the point over here is that those that are later were dependent on the ones before them. That's the way he made his neder, so they become mutar. The ones that were before were not dependent on them, so therefore they remain asur. Sagt the Gemara weiter, Eisvei Ravada Barava l'Rava. Ravada Barava asked the question on Rava's opinion, and as the Rishonim here point out, that this is going to be a question not only according to Rava, this will be a question even according to Rabba. Some are actually not even going to the word Rava here. So the story over here is, I think this is a Mishnah later here in the Masechta. Kainam batzel shani tayim. Person makes a neder that he's not going to taste any onions. Why? And he says shabatzel ra'alev, because the onions are bad for the heart. Amrulai. So then they came and they then told him you made a mistake. Va'aloya kufri yafalalev. But the batzel, the onion that comes from kufri, is actually good for the heart. And now the person realizes his mistake, so he says, oh, if so, that's not. I didn't want to include that in my neder. So the Mishnah says, Hutar b'kufri. So what happens is that the kufri is going to be mutter for him, but not b'kufri bulvad. Now, not only this kufri onion will be allowed for him, but now hutar elo actually again, loy bekufri b'lvad hutar el b'chola b'tzalim. He'll not be mutter in all of the onions. In other words, right over here we see this point that I say that once part of your nether falls apart, you made a mistake regarding the kufri onions, the hutar kulay, the whole nether falls apart. Now the Mishnah there says, "Mai sahoya." This happened v'tiru Rab Meir b'chola b'tzalim. Rab Meir, he was the one that made this kind of a nether, and because part of the nether was hutar, the whole nether is mutter. Now, my love, don't you think, what is that Mishnah speaking about? The person says, when he discovers his mistake, had I known that this kufri onion is good for the heart, then I would have made my nether differently. I would have said, Kol habitzalin asurin, that all onions are forbidden for me, and the kufri mutter, but the kufri is allowed for me. In other words, this Mishnah is speaking about a case that when he discovers his mistake, he wouldn't have changed the whole lashon of the nether that he made originally. He just would have added, besides the kufri one. So therefore, this is a question on Rabbe. Why is it a question? On Rave. Why is it a question on Rave? Because Rave before said that according to Beis Shammai, which is following Rab Meir's opinion, I mentioned before, Rab Meir says regarding Tumura, that you always go with the lashon rishon, what the person says in the beginning. Again, the Gemara's question over here is that Rava that is before said that Beis Shammai is following Rab Meir's opinion that you go with the lashon rishon that a person would have said in the beginning, and therefore, if the main part of the nether, even when he discovers his mistake, still remains, he would have said the same lashon that all b'tzalim are aser. So then, I should say that part of the nether remains. And only the kufri one that is good for his heart, that part of the nether is bottle. So why is Rab Meir saying over here that in this case the whole entire nether would be bottle? The Gemara is assuming that if Rav before said that Beis Shammai holds like Rab Meir, that means that Rab Meir holds like Beis Shammai. They hold the same idea. They hold the same shitta that over here the nether should remain. And as I mentioned, this is definitely a question according to Rava, because Rava holds that in such a case where the person did not change the lashon of his nether, when he discovers his mistake, he says he's not going to change the lashon of his nether. Everybody agrees that in such a case, I don't say nether shhuta miktsas yuta kulay, and the beginning part of the nether remains. So how could it say over here in the Mishnah that the whole nether falls apart? So the Gemara answers, Loi, that's not the case. When he discovered his mistake, but Omer, the person says, or in that case, Rab Meir said, Ilu hayisi yedesh hakufri yafal alev. Had I known that the kufri onions are good for the heart, hayisi aymen, the whole lashon of my nether would have been different. I would have said, Batzel ploini asurin, that only these and these onions are not allowed for me. But the kufri mutter, and the kufri is mutter. So because he changes the entire lashon of his nether, so therefore, now what happens? V'Rab Meir aliba de Rab Akiva. According to Rabbe, it's going to come out that what Rab Meir did over here is only according to Rab Akiva, because this was Rabbe's opinion. When you change the lashon of your nether, it's only Rab Akiva that holds that the nether falls apart. That's the case where they were arguing about. So it will be according to Rab Akiva. And va'alibe de Rabbanan. When the Gemara here says va'alibe de Rabbanan, the Gemara means according to Rava, if you change the lashon of your nether, everybody will agree that nether shuta miktsasi huta kulay. So the case of it, the point is, the case here is he changed, when he discovers his mistake, he says, I would have changed the whole lashon of the nether, and therefore it's not a question, not in Rabbe and not in Rava.